Joel Skousen actually wrote the book on strategic relocation, and you with KHQN and Channel 17 are smart enough to listen. Originating from the #2 moderate growth, medium-sized metro area, Provo, Utah, at the fabulous Rock Canyon Studios, this is the World Affairs Brief. Joel's co-hosts are Paul A. Jensen and Tom Drashel.
Good morning and welcome to the World Affairs Brief with Joel Skousen. Joel, we're so glad to have you back in the studio live with us again.
Well, thanks. I'm tired of traveling. It's good to be back with you.
And we're glad to have you with us too. Tom, how are things in Texas? I understand you're on the road on the way to Dallas.
Yeah, they warmed up a little bit. We had some of your cold weather down here for a week, but we're back to sanity.
Okay. Well, listen, let's cut right into the brief today. And by the way, we are glad that you have joined us today on the brief and the World Affairs Brief. And we'd like to tell you that if you want to subscribe, and you certainly ought to subscribe, you need to go to worldaffairsbrief.com and click on subscribe. Now, we have a special offer for you here on the radio this morning that if you want to get a free copy of today's brief, and it is, again, jam-packed full of information that you're not going to get anywhere else, you need to write an email to editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. That's editor@worldaffairsbrief.com, and you can get a free copy of this issue. Also, if you have any questions or comments today for Joel, you can call us at 1-800-776-1913. That's 1-800-776-1913. Now, I'll remind you, our listeners, that if you subscribe to the brief, you're going to get 52 very informative issues for a very modest fee of only $48. That's less than $1 an issue. You're going to want to take advantage of that. It is very informative, and it's information that is very well researched, very well documented from someone who's been doing this for many, many years. All right, let's get into this brief today, gentlemen. The first thing that I see is that is a story I've been hearing on the news all week. The Republicans yield the budget fight before it begins. There was no fight at all, and many people are applauding and congratulating them for the smooth transition on this budget. What is really going on, Joel?
Well, this was a setup from the last budget fight that there was. House Speaker John Boehner actually capitulated to Obama on the shutdown of government without any concessions whatsoever. And in doing so, allowed the Republicans to take the entire blame for the shutdown and poisoned the waters so that no longer could Republicans ever do it again, because they walked away with their tail between the legs as failures and with the entire blame. And so in the process, what we came up with was a short-term fix that would take us to January 15th, and now this is the proposal to avoid yet another shutdown. In other words, the only thing that establishment Republicans are interested in is avoiding a shutdown to make sure that we don't get the blame. And there is no concern anymore, either among the American people or the government, about the deficits. There never was. Basically, they want to keep spending no matter what. And conservative, hardline Republicans are made out to look like the bad guys now.
Joel, you're right on all of this. I have to say that I was personally, however, shocked. It just never seems to amaze me how brazen that they are. And in this case, I was shocked that the Republicans took the lead. We got a Democratic bill here proposed by the Republicans. And so, in my mind, one of the major, maybe the most important thing to understand about this whole deal now is that they've gone one step further. No longer are they capitulating. You got the Republicans introducing the Democratic bill so that, who is there left to argue about it? The hardline conservatives, who we're going to be talking about. But you've got the Democrats, their bill is being proposed by John Boehner, and then you've got all the establishment Republicans going to go along with him because, my gosh, we're the ones that introduced the bill. This is a bad step. It is a step forward. Would you not agree? I mean, a step in that direction.
No, absolutely. And to even put Paul Ryan up there in front, he used to be the fiscal conservative, and now he's, entered into secret negotiations with the Washington Democrat. They come out with this magnanimous bill, and everybody's clapping their hands. These are expectations for no painful showdown ever again. That's what we were set up with in the last showdown, which we lost because of House Speaker Boehner. And it ensures that the deficits keep growing. There's a big collective public sigh of relief. That means that they take more satisfaction, that is, the public takes more satisfaction in avoiding a crisis now than the long-term debt problems of the future, which are ultimately fatal to the economy. The U.S. is now, I believe, in a permanent state of denial. They want to have their instant fixes. They don't care about the long-term problems. Just give us bread now, and whatever the consequences are, we trust our leaders that they'll find something to do later on about it.
You know, the thing that interested me in this story that you presented here is the fact that many of the Republicans who should be defending the Constitution, defending our rights, are actually some of the leaders for destroying our rights and our Constitution. And you delineate many of these. You name them by name, and you give some quotes to them. And some of these people used to actually be conservative. What is with that?
Well, I would, before we go through, there are some mainstream Republicans who have heretofore pretended to be conservatives who've come out and virtually attacked the hardline conservatives. So we're beginning to find out who the true rhinos are, Republicans in name only, and who are the true liberals. But I want to finish the story on the actual spending bill to show that, what's really in here and why it really isn't good for the country in the long term.
Joel,
yes.
Can I say something about Paul Ryan before you get away from Paul Ryan there? I mean, Paul Ryan is one of those guys. Remember, just a year ago, he was one of the supposedly hardline conservatives to balance the ticket, make it a little more conservative, Romney's ticket and so on, and he's leading the fight on the budget and so on, yet he never has been. He's always been on that side. Well, now he's coming out more, and I have to say, I got to give Hannity credit. Even Hannity is recognizing he's not just going along and saying, well, it's a Republican deal, it must be good. He argued with him. He had him on the show the other night, argued with him all the way along. Ryan's given his justifications about how this is a good thing and so on. And he's saying, but it's not. It doesn't cut the bill. And we're never going to get this stuff in the cuts in the future. Yes, there is this. It's almost as if we have this permanent deal, and yet, as you say also in the brief, I think people are waking up too. I think it's polarizing among Republicans, among conservatives. I think more people are recognizing that we just can't trust the Republican leadership, and we got to think for ourselves. I hope, anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. I have long said the Republican leadership is controlled by the same globalist advisors that controls whatever puppet president is in office at any one time. But basically what we're talking about in this discretionary spending bill, and notice the term discretionary spending, basically it authorizes $62 billion increase in discretionary spending while saving presumably a $23 billion decrease 10 years from now. Now, one thing I want to make very clear is that budgets are never followed. Never. They are political fodder for the day. They make it appear as if we're going to have a balance, but they never follow them because there's always in the following year some continuing resolution that refuses to go along with that budget. So I don't think you'll ever see that $23 billion decrease, even if it were compared to a $6.3 trillion deficit.
Okay.
It
With
only
that,
amounts to a 0.36% of cumulative deficits.
We've got a break for radio.
I got to say here, you remember Wimpy in Popeye cartoons?
Yes.
I'll gladly give you pay you for 2 hamburgers tomorrow if you give me 1 hamburger today. They'll gladly save $23 billion, not spend $23 billion 10 years from now if you'll let me spend $62 billion in discretionary spending any way that I want it right now. It's so much worse than Wimpy. It's so worse than cartoons, and we're buying this stuff. And obviously it's the Democrats' fault, but it's the Republicans' fault. We're the ones who can stop it. Boehner could stop it. The House Republicans could stop every single one of these things. They're in control.
Well, how many Republicans actually voted against this budget, Joel?
Oh, it hasn't been voted on yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it
so
had.
But they got to go along with it.
But the establishment, there's such a mental process of relief that we won't have to be targeted as responsible for a government shutdown. And the problem with the government shutdown is that Congress, this is a loophole in the Constitution, it's a problem, is that Congress is tasked, rightfully so, with taxation and spending issues because they're the closest to the people. And yet, for some reason, they have allowed, under a government shutdown, the government, because he's in charge of implementing the congressional, to pick and choose if there's a shutdown of government, to pick and choose where he's going to spend the remaining money. And obviously,
Joel, you're right. You're right about what's going on here. But I just want to say what Boehner is telling people in private. I worked in Congress too long. I guarantee you what he's telling people in private is what you're saying. Basically, he's saying, look, our introducing this rather than letting the Democrats doing it and us fighting them and so on is our way of not having to take responsibility.
I'm going
to shutdown.
Interrupt you there. We're live in 2 seconds.
All right.
Welcome back to the World Affairs Brief with Joel Skousen. I'm glad to have you joining us this morning. We're discussing items of very, very great import this morning. Right now, we're talking about the Republicans yielding to the budget fight before it even began. Tom, why don't you continue with your comment that we were talking to our television audience about?
Well, just maybe a minor comment, but I think it's awfully important to understand how Congress works. What Boehner is telling Republicans in private is, look, who are saying, wait a minute, why are we introducing the Democrats' bill here? And his answer to them is just what Joel's saying here. Look, if we go and let them introduce it, we fight it, then we end up taking more responsibility for government shutdowns. We lost the last battle. We're going to lose some stuff in the future. Basically, Republican leadership is saying we got to go along with the Democrats, and that's it. We just got to go along with the Democrats, and the best way to do it is to introduce their bills. And by the way, this thing that Joel points out is so huge. It's the big gorilla in the room that we got this $6.3 trillion in deficits over the estimated, and that's right now. Obviously, with every increase in the debt ceiling, but 6.3 trillion right now, and this 23 billion is just a pittance. It's 0.36%. Joel figured 1/3%, maybe in 10 years cut. It's just nothing, and we're doing this. Can we come up with strong enough words to how the Republicans are selling us out?
Joel, that really isn't a cut, is it?
No, it's a reduction in the increase of $23 billion, if it ever happens at all, and which
of 1/3 of 1%.
Yeah, and so this is just for political, and they've just, if you look at the budget in detail, there's all these little things that you could never trace, and no one will ever trace 10 years from now whether or not they follow these things. And while taxes aren't going up proportionate to these increases, the government is finding less resistance by calling them user fees. As a libertarian, I'm in favor of user fees to fund a lot of government, but not if the money's being used by the fee for other purposes, meaning you don't collect gasoline taxes to fund education. You don't collect airline fees or cell phone fees to fund the rest of government, and that's what's happening here. $8 billion more
insurance fees, as you pointed out.
What's that?
Or private insurance fees, as you pointed out, taxing private health care plans.
That's right.
Because of Obamacare.
And so $8 billion more is going to be raised by increasing premiums on corporations that have defined benefit plans. That's basically meant to simply kill private pensions and kill private health care, to make it so expensive that everybody cries out for a single-payer system. And that's really where they're headed with this. And, of course, the airlines are going to get dinged with another fee to raise $13 billion from airline travelers, which don't even count most of us. There's only about 1/3 of people who travel by airlines every year. and they're going to pay the lion's share of all these fees. And it basically guts the sequester. The sequester is kind of like the debt limit. It's a fixed, rough case where you simply say, if you can't come to an agreement on the budget, then you just start cutting across the board. And that forces people to a budget compromise. Well, what they've done now, this Ryan Murray bill actually just removes the sequester and allows them to break the sequester and do whatever they want. And here's what I think. This sets a precedent, Tom. You set the precedent of breaking the sequester, saying we can tinker with this. We don't have to follow the sequester now. And now next year is going to be worse. When this period is up, people are going to get used to this. They're going to say, "Oh, what relief! Whatever we do, we don't want to go back to the government shutdown," and they'll continue to spend. Nobody's thinking about the long-term consequences.
And so, what are the long-term consequences? What are the immediate long-term? Where does it start? Where is this going to lead us? And when is it going to really start affecting our lives? I mean, inflation. What are the consequences of this?
Well, they're pretty smart about this. Everyone like Peter Schiff, who I respect a great deal in most economic things, says this is going to result in hyperinflation. But it doesn't necessarily have to. The Fed is determined to suppress interest rates through fiscal policy at the same time that they're suppressing interest rates by manipulation of the CPI. True interest rates are about 6 to 9% in the United States and have been for the past 20 years. But they're trying to say that they're 1 to 2% by manipulating the CPI downward. What this does is it tries to keep an inflation mentality from raising within the people. If you have a feeling like prices are I got to go buy, you start a buying mentality and you get this hyperinflation workage into the system. But if they keep, and they show every sign they're going to keep doing this, inflation of only allowing 6 to 7% inflation in the economy, they can keep this going for quite a long while. The big death knell on the economy is eventually when you can't pay the interest on the national debt. And that's scheduled to come up sometime in late next decade. They can keep pushing that out a little bit. They can inflate away the debt to a certain extent, but they can manage this if they're careful. And remember, there's a lot of Ponzi schemes built into this system of free money, like the derivatives and the hedge funds and the Forex. All of these markets are built upon free money that the Fed is providing. Keep in mind as well that most of the inflation goes into the speculative markets, not into the real economy. It's kind of a separation, I like to call it. There's about 80% of the new money stays in the speculative economy because it goes through the too big to fail banks. They invested in the stock markets. They churn their money. Some of it's invested back with the Fed at a steady 3% interest rate. Why should you take a risk in the real economy and get a 68% return when I can get a 15% return in the manipulated stock markets and the Forex and the hedge funds? That's why the money's not getting back into the economy, because there's too much churning of the money in the speculative markets based upon this free influx. Now, if the Fed pulled the plug on the economy, stopped free money, all of these Ponzi schemes would collapse immediately. The gold and silver paper markets would collapse because there's about 100 paper contracts for gold as to real gold that can be delivered. And that means people are buying and selling paper contracts when there's no possibility of delivery. That's a Ponzi scheme. It should be illegal.
A question on that. How does this the interjection of the cash and so forth and the purchase in the stock market? I heard a story on the news this morning and yesterday that the stock market dropped the greatest amount that it's dropped in a month because there were some rumors that the Fed was not going to continue to support this
QE3?
Yes.
Well, everybody's watching the Fed now. Everybody knows that this is a balloon that must continually be inflated. So there are hundreds of Fed watchers every single day. That's why the Fed can't get away with pulling the plug out of the economy like they did in the first Great Depression. They pulled the money supply. Nobody was watching the Fed. All of a sudden, people started to pull out of the markets, and it collapsed on itself. There are hundreds of Fed watchers today. So the Fed can't get away with even tweaking the money supply without dozens of people knowing, sounding the alarm. And if the economy came down, who would get the blame? The Fed would. So my theory is And this dovetails with foreign policy, geopolitical theory, that they're planning on giving us a world war with Russia and China sometime in the next decade. And when that nuclear attack on America happens, all of a sudden the markets are destroyed, but it's not their fault. It's Russia and China's fault. And now they have an excuse to create a new world government, to prosecute the war, to create a new world currency. And you have to have a world government before you can have a new currency. I mean, what are you going to do? Replace the dollar with the Chinese renminbi or the yuan? No way. They're not transparent. They've been inflating at 15 times the rate. The latest data, and it's not all that transparent, but 15 times the rate of the U.S. dollar.
Goodness.
And that's why the dollar remains relatively stable, because every other currency is inflating equal to the dollar, and that's why they remain relatively stable one to another.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, let me ask a question about, for us gold and silver bugs like myself. I hear you saying we're talking about the end game and nuclear war, or war ultimately taking care of this debt crisis that is building up and building up, and we'll have the hyperinflation part of it. But if I heard you correctly here just a couple of minutes ago, I heard you saying that even gold and silver, that there's going to be a drop. I read that as a temporary drop because of the paper gold and silver that we've got out there right now, and that there can be, did I hear you correctly saying there will be some kind of consequences to pay? Obviously, that's got to be short term. In the long term, gold and silver is always going to beat inflation. In the long term, it's always going to be worth something and so on. But I hear you saying that at some point we may have a drop in because of the paper gold and silver that's out there, a huge drop, a crash in the gold and silver market.
No, in fact, it's the result is just the opposite, Tom. In other words, because there's a Ponzi scheme out there of the reason that gold and silver has come down from their highs, almost 50%, is because of this manipulation of the paper contracts. When that bubble bursts of the paper contracts, gold and silver skyrockets. It doesn't collapse.
All right. Okay, good. Then I misunderstood you, and I was going to go on to ask how can that possibly make sense, But so I misunderstood. Thank heaven for small papers. All right.
Now the larger question, Tom, is how long can they keep this paper contract manipulation going? And sadly, I think they intend to keep it going a lot longer than we think. We could see gold and silver flat for many years now into the future, because of this remember, they control the regulatory bodies. There are no rules against these paper contracts without any gold backing. They just are paper contracts. There's no rules against these derivatives. For example, insurance companies have rules where they've got to have some 10 to 20% reserves so that they've actually got money in the bank for all these promises to pay to cover for people's losses. There's no such rules for the derivatives. There's no such rules for these gold and silver contracts. And so this is the problem.
And the moral of the story is continue to buy gold and silver as you can. It is, and there's no real downside for the average American. I mean, you can only make 1% on your jumbo CDs or the Treasury bills or whatever, unless you're really a full-time stock market person. And riding the wave continuing up as they continue to print money. There's no downside to gold and silver.
Especially when it's cheap.
But should you be taking delivery on your gold, or at least buying
you have
gold?
To take delivery.
Okay, don't buy the gold paper contract.
Yeah, you have to take delivery.
Okay.
But remember that this is the powers that be are driving the price down because they're also replenishing their supplies at a cheaper price this way. So you ought to get in on that because it will come up. But remember, you need to eliminate your gold and silver stocks, or most of them, before war, because once war comes, people just won't be able to revert to that. They don't know how to tell if it's valid or not, unless you have silver dollars. The silver dollars are the ultimate barter tool for gold and silver, and that's what I recommend.
Okay, we're down to our radio hard break. We'll be back with you in 3 minutes. We're going to continue on the radio. Thanks for joining us today on the World Affairs Brief with Joe Skousen on KHQN. The question, and this is going to be a story we might get to, and we hope we get to, and that is that gold is important enough. There was a senator and a congressman from Kentucky, where Fort Knox is located, that has not been allowed, even with all their political clout, to get in to see if we have any gold in Fort Knox at all. But yet, from the brief, we learned that North Korea, and we'll cover this later, is selling their gold to Russia, possibly. So gold seems to be an important topic. At the top of in 2 minutes and 22 seconds, we'll switch over, if you like, and talk about the Washington hardline haters. But between the two of you, how would you like to close out this story on this new budget that seems to have no opposition whatsoever from either party?
We're screwed. We've been sold out by the only ones that we have any hope for, and the only question is, two things in my mind real quick. One is, how few hardliners are there out there? Maybe we can talk about that the next. Just very few. And secondly, is this hopefully, is there a silver lining that it's going to wake up enough people to say, hey, even the Republicans are selling us out? I mean, this is obviously they did the arithmetic. 23 billion in 10 years, 1/3% savings to give them more now, and to just continue to do the same thing. This is obviously not right. Do not Americans have to wake up sometime to this?
No, really. Remember that the budget process is so obscure, so big, the numbers are so large that Americans just can't comprehend. They simply trust the leaders, and the leaders are giving this snow job to the people that there's no problem, we've got things under control. Well, they don't have things under control. And one of the good things about really tough budget times is that it stops spending, but the government isn't stopping spending. I'm going to cover later on a story interesting about this government disaster mitigation plans. You know, in a sequester, why are they throwing millions of dollars at small communities to plan for disasters? I mean, these are esoteric plans. These are not just the normal, the flood that may come, or the broken water mains, or the sinkhole. I mean, these are huge, catastrophic, pie-in-the-sky plans. And they're throwing millions of dollars. They're throwing millions of dollars at the NSA, at secret budgets, at secret drones. You keep having these secret things being revealed. Where's the money coming from? This is supposed to be a sequester period. This is supposed to be a time of budget tightness. We're throwing, money at our allies. I just don't think they're stopping the juggernaut, the globalist juggernaut, in terms of foreign policy.
Okay, folks. Just 1 second, Tom. We're back live here in just 1 sec.
This portion of the World Affairs Brief is brought to you by Joel M. Skousen's worldaffairsbrief.com. To subscribe, click subscribe now. To make a comment, call KHQN at 1-800-776-1913, 1-800-776-1913.
Folks, welcome back to KHQN 1480. We're glad to have you live here on the radio. We've been talking about a few things on the break. If you want to catch that on Facebook, you can watch live as well as listen live. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Google Hangouts. Just go to khqn1480.com, khqn1480.com, and click on Watch Live. Now, we've got some very interesting topics today with you here, and we are going to switch over to Washington hates hardline conservatives on the World Affairs Brief. Tom, you and I have spoken about this on the air many times. We've watched some of our local Utah and even some of the Texas conservatives go from being supposedly conservative to very, very much liberal. Joe, what is the meaning of this? What's going on with these?
Well, there's no question that Democrats hate hardline conservatives. The government hates hardline conservatives. But what we're talking about here is Republican leaders hating hardline conservatives because they make them look bad. They expose the fact that you are going along with the establishment and you're not doing or acting in according to your rhetoric. And so we have had cataloged by freedomworks.org in the brief, and we won't read all the quotes because they're just too long, and that's why you can get a free sample copy, as we talked about at the beginning of the show. But, you know, people like Mitch McConnell, here's the minority leader in the Senate, you know, talking about punching people in the nose, upset about these conservative hardliners bullying us, you know, hardly bullying us. Senator Orrin Hatch talks about punching people in the mouth. Senator Pete Sessions, you know, decrying what Freedom Works does and that they're betraying the Republican cause because they're causing discontent and they're causing controversy. Well, of course, there's controversy. There's a major difference of opinion. Senator John Conyon, Adam Kurtzinger, Renee Elmers, all of these people, supposedly conservatives, are really raising the bar against those like Senator Cruz, Senator Lee, and Senator Rand Paul, who have been brave enough, you know, to fight these major issues like Obamacare and amnesty. But it's amazing how the Republicans are capitulating all around. I didn't cover in this week, but in previous week we talked about Boehner hiring on a major lobbyist for the amnesty movement. I mean, he's getting ready to sell out the Republicans on this immigration bill.
Ironic. I mean, Mitch McConnell's right. That is the way you stop schoolyard bullies. You punch them in the nose. But the irony is, they're the bullies. They're the ones, you know, and they've been bullying. But now they've been bullying conservatives. I'm talking about Republican establishment has been bullying conservatives for as long as I can remember. They've always marginalized, I say marginalized. I'm going to say demonized, but they've marginalized and excluded them from the political process in every way that they possibly can. But the big deal, as you point out here now, is that they're openly doing it. They're on the attack. They are openly articulating their anger and hatred for constitutional conservatives and saying they're ruining our lifestyle. They're cramping our style. They're making it harder for us to govern. Well, yeah, the constitutional conservatives probably are making it harder for establishment Republicans to govern, who are not governing at all, other than just going along with the Democrats. But they're so the big deal here is that the Republicans are openly saying the Tea Party and Freedom Works and those kinds of people are bad guys, and those Republicans are bad guys. Used to be, you remember Reagan's 11th commandment? You never say anything negative about another Republican. That's gone by the wayside long, long ago, and they're openly attacking him and saying we've got to get rid. And they're siding with the Democrats to say we've got to get rid of the Rand Pauls and the Mike Lees and Ted Cruz's, as you say.
Yeah, at least at least we have to pressure them into silence, you know, by you know, the negative publicity that they get. But it's very interesting that, ironically, or not so ironic, really. You know, Governor Haley Barbour's in this club of liberal Republicans that are attacking FreedomWorks.org and the Conservative Fund for Growth. But his nephew, Henry Barbour, is one of the authors of the report published by the Republican National Committee suggesting that we ought to outlaw these organizations from having any participation in the Republican National Committee. Outlaw them. I mean, this is really purging conservatives within the ranks. Something.
Why doesn't the average American who knows nothing about anything other than just simple logic say, wait a minute, that's crazy. You don't outlaw people's First Amendment right to talk and have an opinion. And yet, that's what we're talking about. The irony of this thing that the what's the word I'm looking for? The
audacity.
It's the sophistry. You know, sophistry is just a form of lies. I can't let a week go by without saying that the father of lies is at work and is succeeding, and he's got the Republican leadership using sophistry to make it sound like that the constitutional conservatives, the rule of law people here in America, who are our last best hope, that they're the bad guys.
Well, you know, Tom, there is this idea, this notion in politics that if we just be pragmatic, we can work together, we can compromise, that things will smooth out. But, you know, unless you tackle these huge issues like unlimited immigration that the government is not stopping, which is just watering down the conservative vote. No matter how much you say, they're never going to vote in large blocks Republican unless the Republicans become socialists like the Democrats, which they are becoming. You've got to stop Obamacare. It's going to kill the health care system within the nation. But there's just so many issues that you literally have to stop because they're fatal to the nation in the long run. That's what we see.
The simple first issue in politics is, do I care more about getting elected and staying elected than I care about the truth and the rule of law and doing what's right and so on? That is the issue that politicians ask first. And so far, we got, by my count, 3 in the U.S. Senate, and maybe a couple in the House, like Justin Amish and so on, that are willing to put principle above politics, above political expediency. But that's the issue. All of this other stuff, once you get past that issue, you decide, no, staying elected is more important, then nothing matters. None of the substance matters whatsoever. The rule of law doesn't matter whatsoever. It's just a way of how to lie and cover yourself. And that's where we are in our society right now. And it's our fault. It's we the people's fault. We're the last guardians of the Constitution, like George Washington said. If we let these liars, many of whom were Gadiant robbers, get away with this, it's our fault that we're not voting them out. We've got to wake up. We've got to understand what's right and wrong. And if we can't do that, there is no hope. I'm just hopeful that it will get bad enough. That sounds bad, doesn't it? But I'm just thinking that that's the only way. It's got to get bad enough for enough people to wake up that we start firing them, or we have another revolution.
Well, that's a big subject, Tom. I kind of object to the language that it's our fault. There are those of us who haven't won. We haven't voted for someone who's won an election in decades.
Well, you're right.
We have tried
I think
to.
Only cumulatively.
We have tried to vote people out. But
yeah,
remember, there is a conspiracy of power in this country to manipulate the news, to manipulate education. And what you need to do is and of course the manipulation of the media has been a free market event, meaning that they didn't force anybody at gunpoint to sell to them. They literally bought out. Now, there was a lot of manipulation and big money that went from government to corporations that created wealth that got into the hands of these globalist powers that have the money to buy out these media efforts. But they've literally gone into the education system with the rule of law of almost outlawing private education by virtue of the fact that you cannot use your private money. You cannot not contribute to the public school system. If you want private schooling, you have to do it in addition to the money that you give to public schooling. And that's wrong. Public schools ought never to be advanced and funded by property taxes or any other kind of taxes on people who don't use them. They ought to be user fee based. And of course, they would die in comparison to property or private schools.
And performance based. What would happen?
Well, but you can't have government demanding performance because the people who control the performance are the very people who have caused the public.
Yeah, but from the standpoint of if you feel like your child is not being educated properly, that's performance. Then you as a citizen make the decision.
But the decision has to be the freedom to take your money elsewhere.
That's right.
And that's what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But you couldn't even get that passed in a conservative state like Idaho or Utah. They would vote against you because too many people love the fact that their big, fancy public schools are paid for by my tax dollars. And they're not going to let me off the hook and say, you have an obligation to support public schooling because this is God, motherhood, and apple pie.
That and the fact that the parents, it's the best babysitter they have, is to drop their kids off at school and they can do what they want or they can go to work or whatever they need to do. It's a wonderful, it's a passing of responsibility from the parents to educate their children to the public, and then there's an agenda. And now we have Common Core and all of these different agendas. But well, we're down to 20 seconds. Tom, what have you got to say on this topic for the next 20 seconds?
I say that if you can afford it, it is time. It's past time to get your children out of the public schools, into private schools, into charter schools, anything but public schools. If you can homeschool, I know that's tough.
Okay. We'll be back with you in 2 minutes. All right, Tom, do you have any other comments on that? What would you like to cover next on this, Joel?
Well, we do want to get to North Korea and this Chinese
I think that's
situation.
really
This
important.
is a major foreign policy.
Purge in North Korea.
Right,
Okay.
because there is a purge going on in North Korea, and it's going to be.
Yeah, I've seen that on the news. The uncle of the current premier there is that his titled premier, the powerful head. Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un, that's right.
So,
his uncle Yang has been purged, which is a big deal because he really was running the country for many, many years. And we'll have to talk about that. Let's see if there's anything we can handle during the break.
You had talked about how gold had affected. That'll be in that story as well. But let me just ask you a question in the 1 minute we've got. Do you think that Rand Paul is going to run, and do you think he has any chances of becoming the president?
Yeah, that's probably a good follow-on to what we were talking about. Is there any hope? You know, we have 3 senators, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and Rand Paul, who are at the forefront of challenging these things in government. Rand Paul probably has the most chance because he is the most well-spoken. He has, a certain amount of charisma. So does Ted Cruz. He's a little bit, of a lightweight to this point.
But he's more boring for some reason. I mean, he's a great guy and he's articulate, but somehow he comes across as not quite as much charisma.
That's right, like Rand Paul. Mike Lee is a little bit too young and cherubic yet, as I said in the brief. He just doesn't have the gravitas that it takes to get it. But later on, perhaps.
All right, we're going to be back. Welcome back to the World Affairs Brief with Joel Skousen. Glad to have Joel in the studio live today with us. He's been out of the country and out of the state, and so we've not been able to have him here. We're talking about does Rand Paul have any chance at all of winning a presidential nomination, let alone being nominated, being elected president?
Quick comment on that. I don't want to get too excited about the possibility because the establishment. There's no way in the world they're going to allow that to happen, and if they can stop it. But the encouraging thing about this is that it's not just one guy now, like it was with Ron Paul. You've got 2 other heavyweights who are recognized as this because everybody else is such lightweights. You've got Mike Lee, you've got Rand Paul has the support of Mike Lee and Ted Cruz, and that means a lot to American people. It's going to be a whole lot more difficult to overcome 3 of them rather than just one lone voice in the wilderness there.
Well, most importantly, what worries the establishment is that you get a person like Rand Paul in there in a presidential debate, like his father, Ron Paul. You get a lot of truth that comes out that they don't want aired. You make people look bad. You uncover the ulterior motives. It isn't that they're going to let Rand Paul win. Won't happen. They control, and I pointed out in the brief how every article about Rand Paul talks about referring to polling. Well, he's so many points below Chris Christie, which is only 2 points, and 9 points below the front runner of the Democratic Party. You notice what they keep pushing before the public constantly. These are the front runners. These are the ones to consider. They keep limiting the American public's choices by who they say has a chance. And they're going to allow, someone in the conservative movement to at least have a start, but they're not going to let them finish. They're going to want to continue to shortchange this position, and
they're going to bring someone in, as you say, who appears and maybe is very, very conservative to take away a whole lot of votes from Rand Paul in the primary. Quick story on this: years ago, 2004, November. Last time I interviewed Ron Paul, and I'd sent to him on the radio, I said at the end of the interview, "Once you run for president, and he said, well, and give us people, us constitutional conservatives, someone to vote for, because we never have one to vote for third-party people and write someone in and so on." And he said, "Well, they'll never let me have it. They'll marginalize and so on the leadership, just like we're talking about today." And I said, "Yeah," and so on. But you understand the idea of leavening the loaf. said, yeah, there is something to be said for that. You know, they'd never let, and I said, that's right, and then they'd have to kill you if you got the nomination right. And he kind of, but the point is that he did at one point decide to run for president. He really did leaven the loaf. I am encouraged. I don't believe for a second, if I had to bet money in my own pocket, you'd have to give me 12 to 1 odds, 15, 20 to 1 odds if I was going to bet that Rand Paul could win the presidency. It'd have to be that high. And yet, I like the fact that he's in the fray. And by the way, it's not perfect. All of us would like, I'd like to be a little bit stronger like Mike Lee is so far. But I like the fact he's in there. He is leavening the loaf, and they will leaven the loaf even more, even though he won't win the the nomination eventually.
Well, it's like what Ron Paul did. Ron Paul never even came close to winning, but he grew the hardcore conservative movement by 3 times.
Wow. By
doing what he did and by staying within the Republican Party. And
right.
Rand Paul is compromising, trying to please the McConnell establishment wing of the Republican Party. McConnell's promised him a lot of exposure, a lot of friendly behavior, and Rand Paul sees that as a way upward, but it's a trap. They'll let you in as long as you compromise and soften your stand, but when you want something, they'll never give an inch towards you.
Surely Rand Paul can see that Mitch McConnell wants to punch him in the nose, and is going to.
Well, let's shift gears if it's okay with you, gentlemen. Let's talk about this purge in North Korea. I've seen it on the news that Kim Jong-un has, I guess, gotten rid of, fired, eliminated his own uncle out of the military.
Well, I don't think Kim Jong-un is doing anything. What I think this is, you got to remember that his uncle Yang Song-taek was really running the military portion, which was the power behind the throne. The first Kim, the grandfather, was a strong man, and he was running the show under China's thumb, and actually under Russia's thumb at the beginning. His son was kind of a playboy, got along, and he's out now, and the son of the son, the grandson now, Kim Jong-un, is in power, and he's a young, cherubic guy who isn't running the show. The military has always run the show under the thumb of China in North Korea. They have done a lot of weapons deals. They've been the primary chain of supply for Iraq and Iran in terms of intermediate and ballistic missiles. They've got a lot of foreign currency. They converted it into gold. They have over 200,000 tons of gold, and for the first time they're announcing they're going to start to sell gold. Now, you don't do that against the wishes of the grandfather, the first Kim, who said, you know, you will never sell the pot of gold that we've established. But they're going to sell gold now, and that means that the economy of North Korea is really on the brink of collapse. And I think the reason is because the U.S. has been successful in interdicting these allies who have been the major buyers of North Korean arms technology. And when those buyers dry up, so does the income of this regime. I mean, North Korea doesn't produce anything for export other than weapons. And so that weapons export business has been highly curtailed. I think they're in trouble. But remember, we have to keep this in perspective. They're a puppet state of China. I covered in a couple of weeks ago, the World Affairs Brief, one company from the United States is building a huge tunnel under the Yellow River.
From the United States?
Yeah. No, from China to North Korea.
Yes, but the
company,
contractor.
The contractor's from the United States, and they're told it's a water tunnel, but of course the specifications show a roadbed in the bottom of this tunnel. I mean, this is enough to drive huge trucks through.
That I don't understand. They got $8 billion worth of gold reserves. Why sell that? To me, it seems to me that that's a drop in the bucket. You know, I don't know what their budget is, but it's got to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, not trillions, but at least the hundreds. I mean, they got a nuclear program for Pete's sake. How can $8 billion make that? Why in the world would you sell your gold if it's only $8 billion worth?
Well, 2,000 tons of gold is worth a lot more to other governments and other buyers than the $8 billion nominal value of the gold. You see, that's highly understated. The international banking community runs on gold. The International Bank of Settlements has gold. And essentially, that's all your country's worth when you trade among the international nations is the stock of gold. And if Russia's picking up this gold, there may be something other than just throwing good money after bad. I mean, obviously, North Korea simply consumes whatever they do. They're not a producing nation other than weapons. They're a consuming nation. And I think whoever's buying the gold, whether it's Russia and China, is tired of bailing it out. They need it for a puppet to start World War III. That's why North Korea is being preserved. But I think this is a trade for more bailout supplies. And it may be food that's coming in advance. It may be fuel oil. I don't know exactly. But it does show a change in North Korea. And it also, as I pointed out in the brief, this is very important, this may be a prelude to a ruse to fake our own demise, or to say that we now want to be moderate because we're collapsing economically. They may do what Russia did in faking their own demise in order to get Western aid and trade. And South Korea is already talking about joining with North Korea and having increased trade as a potential commercial benefit of starting to open up the markets in North Korea to South Korean products.
Would you gentlemen mind, and I think we may have lost Tom temporarily, but I think that in the last 2.5 minutes we have left, I think this FEMA planning trap is very, very important. You alluded to it just a little bit ago, but what is this FEMA planning trap? Why are they trying to entrap cities and small towns and communities into joining up and receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars? What are the cities and towns getting in return, and what is the motive behind it? What's the real story?
Well, I'll just give you the background here. I got a call from a small town in Utah, a guy who's on a board who ends up being a subscriber, and he says, we've got a whole county, and various small towns are suddenly bringing up to our county board meeting whether or not to accept this FEMA money for developing of disaster mitigation plans. Well, everybody in Utah knows that we love preparedness. And so nobody is prepared to say, oh, what's wrong with that? Let's get FEMA money to plan for disasters. But in fact, when you look at the documentation, the planning is so complex. The requirements for getting these grants require that you hire tens of highly paid specialized consultants on how to deal with federal funds and federal contracting, because the penalties, if you start down this road of hiring employees and contractors to get the money to do this planning, and you miss and don't dot any T's, suddenly you get docked the money stops coming, you've hired all these people, it's a real trap. And it's a trap that requires people to continue to hire these high-priced executives to keep them coming in. And what do you get out of this? My problem is that you have all these experts doing pie-in-the-sky preparations. Disaster planning, if you're not realistic, can be an unlimited sinkhole of money and equipment, and that puts you into the federal trough as well, where you promise them equipment. I mean, what is FEMA running around in this sequester age, offering millions of dollars to communities to do this esoteric planning? And it's not about nuclear war, which is a real threat. These are just pie-in-the-sky plans that require a lot of millions of dollars. I think there's a control trap here. Okay.
Well, we're down to 20 seconds, and we're glad that you joined us today on World Affairs Brief with Joe Skousen. And again, you can subscribe at worldaffairsbrief.com, and it's very well worth it. You have a wonderful weekend, and we're glad that you joined us today here on